I only have a little bit of time today, but my goal is to get the electronics set up in the back of the van. Got all our wires and stuff from the different things we've installed. And the main components that we have are the battery and the charge controller. Just got the battery there, charge controller, and I just put some, I forget what it's called. It's like pipe hanger, plumbers use it, but it works really good for just random things like that. So I've got the battery secured and I'm going to get the charge controller attached to the wall. So there's these little spots on the back where it can hook on to a screw or a nail. So I'm gonna hold it on the wall kind of where I want it and then mark those holes with a pen. And then we should be able to set it on and kind of slide it into place. So I think I want it right about there. I don't know, those aren't great marks, but we'll see if we can get it. All right, that's on there nice and snug. I don't know if you can even really see that, but we got the screws tucked on there. On this van, I have 2 solar panels on the roof. They're 100 watts each. And so to figure out the amperage, you divide watts by the amount of volts. So since it's a 12 volt system, we divide 200 by 12, and that gives you, I can't do the exact math in my head, but I know it's less than 20 because 20 times 10 would be 200. So to calculate the amp size, you divide it by the 12 volts and then you round up to the nearest 10 because they sell charge controllers in 10 amp increments. So 10 amp, 20 amp, 30 amp. So I know the minimal size I would need is a 20 amp. And then in the future, if someone wanted to add more solar panels, they would have to swap out the charge controller for a higher amperage. The next thing I'm going to do is connect the charge controller to the battery, and there should be some juice in the battery. Normally they come a little charged up from whatever warehouse they're coming from. So we'll make sure that works, and then we'll get our solar panels plugged into the charge controller. The battery has some terminal bolts, which just look like that. Little bolts that hold everything onto the batteries. And I went to the auto parts store to pick up some ring terminals, which look like that. It's going on the end of all our wires to attach all the wires to the actual accessories. So I have a negative wire, and they were out of red, so my positive wire is actually going to be blue, but it's not a big deal. And I'm going to take all the wires coming off of this and kind of run them to the side so that we can run a little bit of this tubing that'll hold our wires and give it a real clean look. That way this isn't just filled with wires. So I'm going to trim the end of this a little less than an inch. And that's going to go into our charge controller. It's marked on the bottom. It tells you which ones are the batteries and which ones are the solar panels. So it'll be about there. And run it down. And I'm just measuring about how long I want that wire to be. Cut off the end. Then I need to put a ring terminal on this wire. And this is, there's 10 gauge that comes on the solar panels. So for these solar panels, when I installed them, if you watch that video, I spliced some more wire onto them. So I've got 10 gauge here from the panels that's going into the charge controller, and then 10 gauge going from the charge controller into the battery as well. And you can look up some charts and do all the math for your wire size, but for a setup of this size, 10 gauge is going to work great. So I've got a ring terminal that I'm just going to push this wire into. And then Squeeze that down. Make sure those wires are pinched in there good. Yep, nice and tight. Then I'm going to wrap in some electrical tape. You can buy, I don't know the actual term for it. It's like shrink wrap, but specifically for wires. They might just call it shrink wrap. But it'll give you a really good watertight seal. But electrical tape will work just fine. And I'm just making sure to wrap that real tight. There we go. Same thing we just did again, but now with the positive wire. And I'm just kind of eyeballing how long to make this cable. Twisting up those wires because sometimes they kind of fray out. They're hard to get into that ring. And clamp down on that. So it holds it nice and good. And then tape it up. I like to start at the top, stretch it just a little bit. And then once it gets to that wire, I'll cut it off right about there and twist it on the rest of the way. Positive, tighten down the negative. So just slide it up in there and then be able to tighten the screw. And that's nice and snug. Same thing for the positive. And that did just turn on. So we do have power. And the positive is snug. Solar panel is not pulling anything because they're not plugged in. And it should tell us our battery's at 100%. So we'll get the solar panels plugged in and should be able to get a read off of that right away. Because it is overcast, but there's enough light that it should pull something. For our solar panels, I do want to install a switch to make it easy to turn them on and off to stop it from feeding power into the charge controller and the battery. So the way this works is we just put 2 terminal rings on there, one coming in, one coming out, just on the positive wire, and then I'll just bolt that onto the wall and then plug it into the charge controller. Pretty straightforward. I'll probably have it sitting right about there, and then feeding is our positive wire from our solar panel, and I'm going to run it down this wall and then into the battery cutoff. So again, I just have to kind of eyeball how long or how much I want to cut off the wire. And something to also note is that you never want your solar panels plugged into the charge controller while it's not plugged into the battery. So this will make it easy to shut those solar panels off if you ever need to unplug or plug things back in to the battery. Otherwise it'll just fry your charge controller, and you definitely don't want that to happen. Let's get a ring on there and pinch it down. This tape wrapping wasn't as pretty, but it'll be hidden inside the box, so that is just fine. Still functional, just not as smooth as I did the other ones. It's got a little washer on there. Screw those back on. And this can be tightened down nice and good because I'm not going to pull it off at all. It's just ready to go. A lot of times you can get it pretty tight just with your fingers, but reaching in the box makes it difficult to grab. So a little wrench did the problem, or excuse me, a little wrench did the solved the problem. That's what I'm trying to say. Since we're out of the red wire, I'm going to do the same thing with the blue wire and run that from the other bolt onto the positive input for the solar panels into the charge controller. secure that right about there. Now that that's on there, I'm going to trim the end of it and get that plugged in. I'm going to match up the negative, run that along the same wall, the same corner. And I'll go ahead and plug in the negative and then the positive. There we go. We'll get the positive in there. All right, the solar is plugged in. Charge controller is plugged into the battery, so I should be able to turn this on. And we should see the light come on for our solar panels there. And the light came on. So I know they're plugged in, but it's not pulling anything. So we'll have to try that out. Just double check it tomorrow to make sure. Oh, actually it's gonna rain tomorrow. We'll see how much sunlight we get, but that should be good to go. I'm gonna turn it off for now because I'm going to be moving some things around with the battery terminals. And like I was saying, you don't wanna have your solar panels plugged into your charge controller if your charge controller is not connected to the battery. So I'm just gonna leave it off for now, and we'll get the fuse box wired. I didn't have a lot of time yesterday, but I'm back in the van and it is raining today, so I'm doing everything from the inside. So we are working on the electrical. Next thing we need to do is get the fuse box attached. So I'm thinking I'm gonna want it probably right about there. So I'll go ahead and screw that in, and then we can get everything attached to it. So we have 2 bolts on here. This is the post for the positive. This is the post for the negative. And we need to run a wire to each terminal on the battery. So the positive line is going to get an inline fuse, and this has a 30 amp fuse in it, which is perfect because that's the size we need. And you'll just have to figure out, how much power you're going to be pulling from yours, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I need to get a ring terminal. I think that's what they're called. That's what they say on the box. Anyways, a little ring put on it so that we can attach it to the battery. And then I'll run some more of our blue wire, because that's what we're using as a positive, and attach that to the fuse box. It's on there nice and tight. There we go. And then we'll get, like I said, some of that blue wire spliced on the other end. Because I have access to both ends of this and I can freely twist it, I'm going to intertwine the wires just like that. And twist them together really good. And then tape it up nice and tight. There we go. So now I need to run that from the positive terminal on the battery, or the positive post, and figure out how long I need to make it to run it to the top, or excuse me, to the bottom of the fuse box. I did notice a problem that I have is the posts on the fuse box are smaller than the posts on the battery. So I have two different size rings, but they're also made for two different size wires. So what I did is I used one of the smaller rings and I cut that little plastic trim off so that I could open up the bottom of it to fit a larger wire, because I need the larger wire size but the smaller ring. Nice and tight, and that's not going anywhere. And there it is. The wire for the negative post, a little more straightforward. Just run it straight from the top to the battery. So we just need to cut a wire of that size and then get those attached. All right, now that I've got both of those ready, I can go ahead and bolt them on. So make sure my solar panels are disconnected, which they are, because I don't want any power running to the charge controller from the solar panels when I unhook the battery. Oh, actually, while I'm doing this, I do have, I don't even know what you call these. They're just like cigarette ports, but they have the inline fuses built into them, and then you just plug them directly into the battery. So rather than having to wire my own into the fuse box, I'm gonna plug a couple of these in. That way I can plug my fridge into one, and then the other can be used to charge. You can put an adapter in there for USB ports to charge your phone, or I don't know, whatever you need. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug these in the same time that I attach the other wires. That way we don't have to keep pulling the bolts out of the battery. So we're wiring all the negatives first. And I'm going to be intentional about the way that these wires are facing, because I do want them tucked into the corner as much as possible. And then same thing with the positive wires. There we go. Now I just need to attach them to the actual fuse box. So I've got both on there, and now we can start wiring all the different accessories. I've got all these wires here, and luckily I've labeled them so I know what they're coming from. But we've got the fan, we've got 3 different lights, and I think that's it actually. The fridge will plug into one of those cigarette adapters or cigarette outlets. One of the things I just wired in there. That should just plug in no problem. I do need to check the fuse sizes to make sure it's the right size for the fridge. And then once we get all these things wired, we'll throw some fuses in here, and then everything should start right up, no problem. This next part will be a little bit of repetitiveness, I guess, but I'll explain here. So this is the fuse box I got off Amazon. This top that's all the negative terminals, and that's, you know, tied into the negative, and then the positives are going to go in these individual spots, and then of course the fuses will go here. So I'll go ahead and just get all these wires attached, just because it's the same thing I've been doing. It's just putting those ring terminals on and screwing them in, and then show you how it looks once I've got them all on there. It looks a little bit messy, but it's good to go. And a lot of these we can kind of just pull out of the way. That's what we're looking at right there. So I decided to put all of the lights just on the right side, and then the fan is attached on the left side. So I've got all the negatives up top and the positives next to the slots for the fuses. So this light means that the fuse is either broken or not there, of course. The reason the lights aren't on this side is because the switches are actually turned off. So if I hit the switch on the light, oh, that shouldn't have gone on. Because it shows the light for the fuse came on. Huh, that's interesting. Came on that one too. It is pretty dim though. That's interesting. So I guess it feeds just a very small amount of power to know that the circuit is not on. I didn't know that, so that's interesting. But we're gonna get some fuses in there. Let's see, for the fan, I've got some notes here. The fan needs a 10 amp fuse. If you know the watts, you can divide the watts by the amount of volts. So in this case, it'd be 12 for a 12 volt system, and that'll give you the amps. And then you multiply the amps by 1.25, and that'll give you your fuse size. So I've already calculated it. So I'm gonna put this 10 amp fuse into here. And now we should be able to pop this open and use our fan. There it is. And of course the light went off because the fuse is in there now. So I'm gonna drop some fuses into the slots for the lights. And they actually only need like a 1 amp fuse. They pull so little power. But I don't have any of those. So I'm gonna throw some 5s in there and it'll be just fine. This light. Oh, much brighter that time. See, so this is the one that had a small bit of power going through it without the fuse, compared to the one that has the fuse. So that is good to go. Throw some fuses in the other ones, and then I'm gonna use this wire, I think it's just called wire conduit, and get some of these wires kind of cleaned up, and then I'll show you how that looks. Real quick, I actually forgot one thing for our charge controller. It comes with this thermometer for the battery. So it just plugs into the bottom of it. And then this is the sensor. And you don't actually want it touching the battery. You just want it very close to it. So I'll just probably screw it into the wall, probably about there. That way it can just read the temperature around that, and it helps to not overpower the battery when it's hot out, because you don't want overheating issues. Came out pretty good. It's still a little messy here in the middle, but you can only do so much to hide the wires. But as far as like being an open electrical setup, I don't think that's too bad. A lot of people do like to put inverters in their vans, but that's as simple as just bolting it right onto the battery. So that wouldn't be difficult to just, you know, add it right onto the positive and negative if someone wanted to do that. But that conduit worked out great. And we've got power to the lights, power to the fridge. Of course, the sink runs on its own battery. But as far as the electrical goes, pretty straightforward. Just make sure to check your fuse sizes. You can go on Google, just go to Google Images and search 12 volt wire sizing chart, and you can figure out what size wire you need for whatever you're adding, you know, whatever appliances or things you're putting in your camper. And it's pretty straightforward. It can seem intimidating at first, but you just check your wire sizes, check your fuse sizes, make sure you have solid connections between everything, and it works out just fine. So let me know if you have any questions, and see you in the next one.